Hey everybody, Anthony and Bob Barker are back again with another build. This time we are making a wine and whiskey cabinet for one of my friends. So we went back and forth a little bit, figuring out what he was going to need out of this unit, and after that we kind of figured out a design that was going to work well for him. So the main components of this is going to be three different sections. The top section is kind of an open shelved area. The middle section is going to have wine storage on the sides with a display area in the middle. And then the bottom section is going to be a closed cabinet that's going to have additional wine and shelved storage. To get started, we got some white oak veneered plywood because that has the grain pattern he was looking for, and it does match some of his existing furniture as well. So for on here, we're just basically putting some dados on the back for the joining the two pieces and horizontally for the three different sections so we can match it all together. And so I just continue breaking this all down under the watchful eye of the supervisor there, who is making sure nobody interrupts our very important work. And for this unit itself, it's actually going to be set in a corner, so the two back sides of it will never be seen. So that was kind of important for the design because it gave me a little bit more freedom for how I'm going to be doing the joinery for the different shelves and everything. So the pieces that we've been cutting out here is for the different sections, the dividing shelves and structures. Also, we're going to be doing a partially enclosed upper area that's going to be more of a triangle shape, as you can see us cutting out the divider for that one right here. And the shape of this actually posed a couple interesting challenges for me because the top part is more triangular, and then once you get to the lower section, it's going to be more kind of square / rectangular. So it kind of creates, I feel like, some visual interest, like so it's not just too boxy or anything. But that does make it a little bit more challenging later when we're starting to do the face frame and all the finish work. Creates more additional angles, as you can kind of see there. So since we have all the basic structure made, we did that dry fit and everything fit well. So now it's time to get it glued up. Now those shelves there are not glued at the moment. I'm just using that just to kind of help me get these back pieces lined up properly. So we glued them all together, clamped them in place, and that alone would have been enough. But I figure since nobody's ever going to see this backside, it doesn't hurt to put a few more screws in there just to kind of keep it even extra secure. So after that dried up, we got on to doing the shelves, and I did a lot of pre-sanding on this because I figured with all these different little corners and everything, it would be terrible to try to get into those tighter spaces to sand it later. So we just went ahead and did that now, and like the other piece, we're gluing and screwing all these shelves together. I don't always show all of the glue that I put in there because it gets a little boring watching me spread glue over and over again, but trust me, there is glue in every single one of these joints. And for this top piece, I didn't even bother with a rabbet joint because we can just glue and screw this in, and then with the finish trim that we'll be putting on later, that's going to hide all those edges of the plywood. So with that, then the next part was to get some supports put in for the bottom part. So like I said, that's going to be more kind of square-ish, and the front end has really no supports with the main plywood, so I wanted to have something there that's going to kind of keep that part from sagging down. So what I ended up doing is just ripping down some of the plywood here, and I did a 45-degree miter there, and I just glued and used pin nails to get this thing together, and it held together really nicely. And I was really careful trying to get those pin nails into the grain pattern because then it hides them even more. I mean, even if you don't do that, they're so small you barely even see them anyways. And then on the edges, we just did some iron-on edge banding just to kind of keep that nice and seamless. So with that one ready, we're doing some of the other covers / supports here on the top because, like I said, this is only partially enclosed and the rest is going to be open shelving. So we got all of that made up and the adjustable shelf in the middle. And that really completed the top segment, but that is the easiest one of all three of them. So the next part was the more challenging issue, is figuring out how we're going to do these wine racks. And that I went back and forth on the design and the joinery of them. And the supervisors paid really close attention and offered me lots of good advice on how to get it done properly to make sure it's going to come out the way we expect it to. So his final plan is what we're going to do is we're going to get sheets of plywood, and then we're going to have cross supports that get connected directly to the outer plywood walls. So we're going to have to rip down a whole bunch of these. So you can see here we're just doing multiple, and I initially just did those to rough size and then get them down to the final size to make sure they're all completely the same width with my table saw. So for the joinery, I initially had lots of plans to do either dominoes, dowels, or something like that, just to kind of keep everything hidden. And then I realized you're never going to see underneath these shelves, so why am I making this more complicated than it needs to be? So I decided just to do pocket hole screws on one side, and on the other side that faces the outer plywood of the main cabinet, I'm just going to screw those directly in place because, like I said, you'll never see those anyways. And so I made a couple spacer blocks here and just made sure I put those on each side of it, and then screwed each one of these into place all the way up to get all of the pieces in place. And then I repeated that same process on the other side, and there's a little bit of overhang because it goes into that corner like you see there, so then the two edges will end up coming together. Now, I probably could have got away with using a thinner plywood, but I kind of liked the beefy look. It just made it feel like a little bit more sturdy and had a better visual appeal, I felt like. But what I would do on both of these sections, we get them in place, and then I would just clamp them together and then screw them together from the inside. That way they'll never come apart. Now, another step is we did want to have some LED lights for the display areas and the upper shelves. So we're going to put that in bottom, and we're going to have to drill through all of those shelves just to run the wire later. But for here, we're just going to be putting a hole straight through the back, and then we'll cover this up with a grommet, and that's just for the main power cord just to get connected into the outlet behind it. I didn't really think about how I was going to run the wire up until this point, but I found this very long drill bit in one of my drawers, and it worked perfectly to make space for the wire to go up through there. And of course, we just put another hole into the upper shelf, and that's going to go behind where the wine racks are up top, and so you'll never see any of those wires. And so before I start putting everything in for its final fit, I figured it now was the best time to start adding some finish because you don't want to have to get into all those nooks and crannies. And for the finish, we did do a Rubio monocoat. He picked Cortado. I basically had him go to the website and figure all the colors, and this is the one that they like the best and matches what they have in their existing furniture. So after we screwed those middle wine racks into place from below where you'll never see it, we just repeated the same thing on each one of those shelves from the back side of the cabinet, and then we're going to repeat that same process for the lower ones. Now here I just put another 1/2 inch piece of plywood just to give me a little bit more of a spacer for the trim that's going to be holding the cabinet doors later. I could have just made that a little bit wider, but I didn't want to have too big of a space for the wine bottles to kind of wobble all around. So now we're adding the lower support, and when I did the finish, I did tape off the areas where that's going to contact so you can still get a good glue bond there. And we're still using some pocket hole screws up on the top part, and from below we're just screwing it straight into there, so it's going to keep it nice and sturdy. And so that gets the main structure of it in place, but the next thing is we want to have some shelves in there. And I figured it'd be nice to have them being adjustable shelves. That way he can kind of figure out how much space he needs in each area for the different wine and whiskey bottles that he has. So we just did a few different pin spots for the pins there, and we did some on each side of there and also on the inner parts of the support, so it'll hold it on all four sides and those won't fall over. And then we're going to do the same thing on this upper segment, and we'll keep that shelf adjustable as well. So with that, all that ready, we're going to get these lateral supports in place, and we're gluing and screwing those from the top, some pocket holes from the bottom, and some straight screws in from the back side of it. And I know all of that is probably way overkill because honestly just the glue alone would have been fine, but this thing will definitely be rock solid and will never come apart. So with all those pieces in place, we're ready now to start making the face frame. And for this, we are using a solid white oak. So I planed that down to the right size, and then we can get ready to start chopping it and then ripping it down to the sizes that we need. And I figured doing this with a solid wood is going to get you a little bit more durable areas in the front that's more likely to get dinged and dented. I didn't want to just have plywood with edge banding there because it's just going to be more prone to damage. Now, I kind of deviated from my original plan once I got started. I was originally going to make everything very uniform for the face frame, but I kind of decided I wanted a little bit more depth to it all. So I ended up doing different thicknesses for each one of the sections just to kind of create a little bit of a visual break. But these pieces we're putting together is for the lower section. For that, all we needed was a 90-degree miter there in the middle, and then we'll be just connecting those. So I glued them together, put some tape and just a couple pin nails just to hold them in place until that glue dries. And then I did that for 2 of them, and then we glued and pocket hole screwed the other sections of it together, so that'll give me a complete face frame for the lower section. And I did leave some of these pieces longer than they needed to be. I figured it's not a big deal to have it kind of hang off the edge, and then I can just trim those to place once I get it fully onto the cabinet. So I'm going to be doing each one of these face frames separately. My original plan was to have the entire thing be one piece and have it all screwed together. But once I realized how with the different sizes and all those different sections, it was just going to become way too difficult to get everything to line up properly. So in the end, I feel like just doing them in separate sections was the best way to go. So after we got that made up, we glued it and clamped this one in place, and that's going to hold it just fine. So after that, it's now time to get moved on to the upper section. So for this, we just needed a 22.5-degree angle there. And then that will cover that different shape there up top. And I realized before I put all these together, I might as well just do some roundovers on the edges. That way I don't have to do it when it's on the cabinet later. It just makes it easier to get that finished. So for these ones, we glued these together, and then we just used a bunch of blue tape on all sides of it as clamps. And then I let that sit until it was dry. And while that was happening, I figured let's put in the dado for the lights on this adjustable shelf. So we just did that, and we have these aluminum channels that we kind of cut to size, and that has the diffusers that's going to hold the lights. So you can see the shelf there, and of course we still have to finish that up. But we'll go ahead and put on the face frame now. So now for this one, we have a thicker section up top and the lower section, and that's why I kept these separate instead of connecting this entire section of the face frame together. Because once I got it in place, I realized that those side sections, it just looks funny if it's thicker. So we're gonna have those much thinner compared to those, so that step off, it would make it really difficult to pocket hole screw those together. So I figured if I just glue everything together and have a really tight friction fit there, it's going to turn out just fine. So after we have those ones done, it's time to finally finish the rest of the trim here in this middle section. Now my original plan was to have a much thicker piece right there, but once I put it in there, you can see it just didn't look quite right. So I was going back and forth between putting the thicker piece versus just edge banding versus just a plain down smaller one. So I ended up deciding just to do just like a very thin, almost like an edge band, but just more with a solid wood there on the edge. And that I think gave a much better look than the thicker piece would have. So for that, we just glued it and also pin nailed right into those grain patterns. And then once we come over and finish that, the whole thing will be seamless. And from here, you can see we're just cutting off the extra parts of the face frame that hung over. So that whole edge now is just nice and continuous. And for the bottom, we decided we're going to put some rubber feet. And I put those where they are here just because I wanted them to be inset some. That way it's barely off the ground and it looks like it's kind of just sitting there on its own. So next part is we're running the wires and getting these all together. Now what I like to do is just put a little bit of solder on the connectors on the LED lights and the wires, and then they just go together really quickly. And then you just go ahead and peel the back and just stick them into the channels that we screwed underneath each of these sections. And those wires will connect to each sections, and they're easier to hide. You don't have to worry about lights going up the sides. Now on this adjustable shelf, I did have to put a channel in the sides of it for the wire to go through. And I also notched out a little channel so it can go up and down as well. So with all that done, the next part is we're going to be making some cabinet doors for that lower section because it's a little bit too busy to leave open. I think it'd just be cleaner if we can have that closed. So we're going to be doing some shaker style doors, just like we've done on many other shaker panels before. So we're going to get those all into the right size, and then we'll go to our router table and get the grooves cut out for each one of these sections. Now I did kind of mess up on my selection when I was getting the materials for this. Normally what I'll do is I'll have a 3/4 inch piece for the frame, and then for the center I'll do a 1/4 inch panel. Now I ended up doing a 1/2 inch panel, which is I normally do for like drawer faces, just so it sits flush in the back, but I kind of just spaced out when I got the wood, so I ended up doing the 1/2 inch panel. So for this one we are gonna have to rabbet out a groove in it, and then it'll sit nice and flush on the back / inside of the shaker door, and it is not really a big deal in the end because it's going to look well. So for here, we're just going ahead and just doing a little round over on the inner edges of this. I figure it's a lot easier to do that now than to have to do it by hand later. And then we get to the assembly where we're just basically kind of get these a nice good snug fit on each other, then smear glue on the edges, and we can glue this all up together. Now, while I was doing this, I'm like, wow, these doors are kind of really big. And for some reason, it just didn't kind of click in my head that like how big they truly were. So I just kept on chugging and gluing and then clamping these together. And when I got to the second one, I brought it over to the cabinet and I realized there is a reason why they look so big. I made them about 5 inches too big. I think what I ended up doing is when I was measuring my center panel, I went for the entire width instead of the width of the inner portion of it. Luckily, my table stall was still set to the right size of the rails and stiles, so I was able to rip off those edges and cut it down to a smaller area. And I had to redo the grooves there on the router table, but I was able to salvage the pieces and not have to get more lumber to remake those doors. So once they dried up, I just squared up the edges, and then we can get them fit to the cabinet itself and make sure all the gaps and everything go well. And I did make them oversized originally. That way I figured I can just cut them down to get the fit that we need. Now, another thing that I had to really think about was where these hinges are going to go. We went back and forth about concealed hinges versus just regular ones. We ended up wanting to do the soft close concealed, so it was very tricky to get these into place because I had to be very precise with the measurements to get them right on the edge of those shelves, so those slots for the wine is still usable. It ended up being a really tight fit, but each one of those slots are still workable to be used properly. So we put one on each side, and we get those where they match up together, and then we'll go ahead and finish those up a little bit later. But now I figured it was a good time just to clean up all the wires, get everything nice and hidden, and you can see there we left a little extra loop of the wire that we shoved into that case. That way that shelf will still be adjustable. It can go up or down. So in the final stretch here, we got the finish on the cabinet doors, and then we drill out the holes for the cabinet pulls. And I use a Forstner bit to sink in the screws in the back, the bolts in the back. That way they don't stick out or hit the support that they're going to be leaning against. And then with that, we can reinstall them, and the piece is done. I think the piece came out really well. There's more than enough storage, and I think it looks pretty good with those lights on. And here you can see how those different thicknesses of the face frame pieces create some extra depth. So that's it for this project. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it in the comments below. And if you do like our projects overall, it'd be really helpful if you dropped a like or subscribed. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one.